Hey guys, welcome to week 2. Hope everyone had a good long weekend. Posted plenty of stuff online. By all means, that does not mean you have to start working on it now, but it is there for you, so in case you want to. Moving on to chapter 2. So this is scientific method. And talked about why psychology being a science is because of the scientific method. So a few steps in here. First is observing some phenomenon. You have to kind of notice something happening in order to start trying to investigate it more. After that, you start formulating hypotheses. Hypothesis is just a testable, educated guess. It can be in the form of a question or a form of a statement, but it's something that you have to be able to test and look out for. Prediction is what you think is going to happen. So, and your hypothesis is going to reflect that. We're going to talk in a little bit about caffeine and blinking, kind of a fake made-up experiment that I had integrated into the PowerPoint. So kind of the hypothesis with that is that drinking caffeine leads to more blinking. That's something that you can test, and that's part of an experiment. We'll talk about experimental method here in a minute. Step 3, research. Why do you think that this is going to happen the way that you think it's going to happen? And you're going to find research to help integrate those things and provide evidence before you start looking at your actual experiment. Again, empirical method, things that you can observe with your senses. Kind of a review from chapter 1 there. A variable. Variable is anything that you can change. Okay? Now, whenever we talk about this, there are 2 types of variables. You have an independent variable and you have a dependent variable. And this is how I want you to remember them, okay? July 4th, Independence Day. You have an independent variable, which you have the freedom to manipulate. So whenever you hear independent variable, think of July 4th, think of Independence Day. This is something that you can directly change or manipulate. And what you're going to do is once you do that, you look at the dependent variable. And this is something that you don't touch. You know, you're going to manipulate your independent variable. What you're looking for is to see how that's going to affect your dependent variable. Whenever you change your independent variable or whenever you manipulate it, how does that affect whatever else it is that you're looking for? So we'll talk about it more here in the fake experiment coming up, and hopefully that gives you guys a little bit better idea. But remember, independent variable is the one that you have the freedom to manipulate. Your dependent variable is you are looking at to see, you know, what happens once you do make the changes that you're looking at. And again, whenever we get to this, I'm on page 28 in the book, and it has kind of the definition for operational definition. I feel like this gets easier with an example. So I'm going to come back to that whenever we get to our fake experiment. Step 4, drawing conclusions. So you've looked at your independent variable and your dependent variable, and you know, you've seen, okay, when I do this, this is what happens. Okay, well, what does that mean exactly? How does that generalize to the outside world? What is the importance of that? What is the significance? And that's what you're looking at whenever you're drawing conclusions. And then evaluating the theory. So what is the possible explanation for why this is? And that's when you go through and you use that research to say, hey, this is what research says, and my findings support this, or my findings refute this. So hopefully that gives you a little bit better understanding. So moving on with the different types of research. Talking about descriptive research. All descriptive research does is exactly what it says, describe. All it does is describe phenomenon. It may or may not give an explanation, but that's not the purpose of it. The purpose of it is simply to describe what you see. You know, what it is, when it happens, in what situation, stuff like that. And there's a bunch of different types. So observation. In terms of observation, I want you to focus specifically on naturalistic observation. And this is how I tend to remember this. And you're going to laugh. You are looking at, say you're looking at kindergartners. Kindergartners notice new things, new situations, new toys, new people. So if you're a new person coming into a kindergarten classroom, their focus is going to be on you. And that's why you try and make as little attention, put as little attention on yourself as you can. You try and blend in the best that you can. And it's like, think of Steve Irwin. Oi, we're observing the kindergartner in their natural habitat. Look at little Timmy as he throws the box. Bad Timmy. And it's like, you do these things and you want to just sit back and observe. You don't want them to notice you even being around. And a lot of times you may go into, school psychologists do this all the time. They'll go into a classroom to observe a specific child, but they don't tell the child that. They don't tell any of the children that. The teacher may simply say, we have a guest joining us today, or may even deceive, which is part of the scientific method sometimes, may deceive and say, yes, we have a guest who's evaluating me. And that is to take the pressure off of the children to behave a certain way. It is to try and ease them into that comfort of an everyday routine. And that's kind of what naturalistic observation does. Sometimes your mere presence will alter behaviors, especially when you're looking at younger children. And naturalistic observation tries to minimize that as much as possible. So you don't have the participants come to you, you go to them. Surveys and interviews, everyone's kind of done these at some point, I feel like, and we get incentives to do them now, where, you'll have, get a free latte if you take our survey, or, McDonald's has been having them where it's like, they give you the receipt, and it's like, get a free sandwich when you tell us about your experience. Surveys and interviews, they will oftentimes give you an incentive for them and try and get your feedback. Case studies. Now, case studies are something that occur when we can't make something else happen. So, one of my favorite examples is, unfortunately, serial killers. Whenever we catch a serial killer, people spend a great deal of time looking at their life. What was their relationship with their parents like? Where did they grow up? Was the family overly strict? Is there any kind of religion in the household? What motivated them to do this? Were they abused as a child? All of these things. We start getting really deep and in depth because the bad thing has already happened. You're not creating another one, but you know that this is what has happened with this person, so you look for potential explanations in their past. Another really good example of this is natural disasters. We're not going to go out, we're not going to create earthquakes, or we're not going to create tsunamis. But what we are going to do is whenever they occur, what do we notice? What happens to the people who are affected by these things? And that's what case studies really do. I personally have a friend who is an art therapist. And whenever we were in grad school, that's when the first really big incident happened over in Haiti. And she went over to Haiti and started noticing, what was going on, what kind of behaviors they were seeing, what kind of therapies they needed, stuff like that. Now, correlational research. A correlation simply means that there's a relationship between two variables, okay? Lesson number 1, I kind of told you last week about Freud and psychodynamic or psychoanalytic. Correlation is that two things are related. Correlation does not equal causation, okay? What this means is that just because there is a relationship between two things doesn't mean one causes the other. And you're like, Dross, I get that. But hear me out, okay? So one of the things that we may look at is diet and weight loss. So we used an example last week in the PowerPoint of Kelly, who's lost 20 pounds. And we talked about how it could be a good thing or a bad thing. You don't know. But what you may notice is certain patterns or behaviors. So, maybe Kelly is trying to lose weight. And as a result, she's gone on a diet. So she went from eating 2,000 calories a day to eating 1,200 and adding mild to moderate exercise. Okay? So Kelly has lost 20 pounds, okay? But she's also added 2 things in there. She's added diet and she's added exercise. So naturally that has to be the reason why she's lost weight, right? Not necessarily. And this is where correlation does not equal causation. Did she lose weight because she changed her diet? Maybe. Did she lose weight because she started exercising? Maybe. Maybe it was a combination thereof. You can't tell what actually caused it. At the same time, again, maybe she's had a change in medication that's caused the weight loss. And she's trying to lose weight, but maybe it's the effect of something else. You don't know. So, positive correlation. What this means is as one variable goes up, so does another. The biggest example of this, or an example of this that would most likely be important to you guys, would be class attendance and grades. So what they found is as the number of classes attended went up, so did a student's GPA. And that's an example of a positive correlation. And is it that the student's grades went up because they went to class? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe it is just that the smart ones happened to go to class. You don't know. But that's why you say you can't say correlation equals causation. It may or may not have been that. You don't know. Versus a negative correlation, which is as one goes up, the other one goes down. Okay? So, and with that, think about sleep and depressive symptoms. So what you may notice whenever you look at certain things is people who have depression, as their number of hours of sleep increase, they may notice their depressive symptoms going down. And one possible explanation of that is because sleep deprivation may exacerbate depressive symptoms, which may or may not be true, but you can't prove it because there are going to be other factors that you have to question and potential causes for that decline in depressive behaviors. Maybe they're sleeping better, but maybe it's because they started taking a psychiatric medication. You don't know. You can't say for sure this is what caused it. And this is why we have experiments. So, talking about correlational research, again, you're examining the relationship between variables, and the purpose is determining how they change or affect each other. So, and that's going on to page 33. So I'll talk about checking in with a PowerPoint now, observations, surveys, interviews, case studies. I put a link on the PowerPoint also. This is another case study. It is a gentleman by the name of Phineas Gage. He was a railroad worker, and there was an accident at work one day, and he got a giant railroad spike through his head. Yes, he survived, but it's a really popular case study. Obviously, we're not going to shove railroad spikes through people's heads, but when it happens, we want to see how it changes their behavior. So that's going along with case studies. Blank research that describes and defines behavior, its frequency, etc. That's descriptive research. Correlational research discovers relationships between variables. Again, correlation does not equal causation. So just because 2 variables are related to each other does not necessarily mean that one causes the other. Now, correlation coefficient, what that does is it is a numerical representation of how strong the relationship is between 2 variables. So let's say that 99% of the time that when a student went to class, their GPA went up. You would have a very strong correlation coefficient, and it would be a positive one because it's a positive correlation, and you may have like a 0.8. The closer to 1 it is, the stronger the relationship. So talking about that. Negative correlation, maybe insomnia and learning. As insomnia increased, learning decreased. And that, I'm willing to wager, probably does not have as strong a relationship as maybe GPA and class attendance and grades, but it should still be a pretty strong numerical value. So moving on to that, and didn't really talk about the third variable problem, not really going to assess on that. But again, kind of going back, using critical thinking, kind of what we've already talked about, how, you know, with correlational research, it could be related to this or that, but how it can be other things too. That's really what the example of that is. Cross-sectional design, I didn't really talk about either. Longitudinal design. This is kind of important, and I didn't put it in the PowerPoints, but it is important. Longitudinal research is something that happens over time. So say, for example, I'm going to go with a school psychologist again, because this is a really good example. Maybe I go in and I look at behaviors of kindergartners. Maybe I want to look at symptoms of ADHD in kindergartners. And what I will do is I will find maybe 10 participants, something like that, and I will go and I will look at these individual kids as kindergartners, and I will do a certain assessments and ratings to see their levels of ADHD type behavior. With longitudinal research, I'm going to come back in 2 to 3 years, and I'm going to do all of those same assessments over again. And I may be looking to see how time affects these things, maybe classroom instruction, behavioral interventions, whatever it is. So I'm going to come back in 2 to 3 years and I'm going to reassess. And then I'm going to come back again, maybe when they're in 5th grade, and look at it all over again. You follow a specific sample over a course of time. So, you keep the same people, but you keep checking in on them periodically to see what changes. And that's what longitudinal research is. Experimental research. Carefully regulated procedure in which the researcher manipulates one or more variables that is believed to influence the other variables. What you are looking at doing is you are trying to establish causal relationship or causation in this, okay? So, and that's what experimental research is. Again, with independent variables, you are directly, intentionally manipulating one or the other and seeing how it affects your